Hello everyone, welcome to Module 1 of Introduction to Law. You'll find that this unit is a little bit larger than those that follow it, and that's because we've got a lot to do to lay the foundations out before we get started. And this whole unit is quite front-ended in that way, and part of that is due to the fact that this teaches into the law degree as well as the criminology degree. And in the law degree, the other units that students are studying need the skills that we are bringing in here. So it's sort of like when I ask the other lecturers what's the priority for what we need to teach up early in Introduction to Law, they say everything. We want students to understand everything before the first week of course, first week of semester. So that's not very helpful, of course, but I understand where they're coming from. So yeah, you'll find that there's a lot to get through, and it's probably easy to get overwhelmed with this. But take a break, and come back to it, and it will get clearer over time. So just be aware that if you think this is a breakneck pace and we're going to keep up this pace through the whole term, it will slow down a little bit after this one. Okay, so the focus of this week is really to lay down some of those key concepts around law and what the law is and how it works, and also to give you some guidance around the transition to university study, because most of you, this will be your first degree. Some of you have come back to change your degrees, but for most of you, it'll be your first degree, and might be your first at CQU, and CQU does things differently to other unis in any case. So it's to give you those basic foundations. And one of the things we introduced this week is the idea of a study journal, and that is keeping notes in one place on your study progress. So not just notes on what is the content and what is the material for this particular week, but also thinking about your own progress and making notes that you can refer to later. And that study journal can be something that's a physical thing. And I mean, personally, I quite like the notebook I carry around and jot down notes in. Or it can be a file on your computer, it could be a Google Doc or whatever. But it's important to start thinking about making notes and keeping that as you go along, particularly because you'll often have to refer to it later and go, well, where was that? What did I need to know that for? Come back for it and to refer to those notes. So throughout the study guide, you'll see often there'll be prompts to say, in your journal, write this down, think about that. Now, we're not ever going to look at that, we're never going to mark you on that, and we don't expect it all to be written in any particular way. But we're also very experienced with the process of learning, and we put these prompts in so that there's something you can think, so that the things that are going to be useful for you to jot down. The other aspect that's really good about these journals is to have a look at them at the end of term, and then later on as you study, and to realise how far you've come. And they're really good at tracking your progress and going, okay, way back then I was thinking this and this was how I was approaching things, and I've learnt from that. And that actually gives you a nice real sense of achievement when you do that, and you can actually see how far you've come. So that's the first thing, is there'll be references throughout the notes that say, in your journal, discuss this or do that. Don't have to hand it in, it's not something that's assessed, but this is just a prompt for you to start making those journaling notes as you go, so that you have that resource to fall back on. Alright, so the other aspect of this module is getting you thinking about the core issues of law and justice, and some of the key principles and ideas around law that help you understand the reason why law is structured in the way it is, the way it works in the way it does. And we're really just giving you those basics of understanding things like, well, what is rule of law? Everyone always talks about rule of law. What does that actually mean? It's also interesting to see these as design issues and design principles, and to actually start to understand that the way that law is created is actually based on a certain philosophy and a certain worldview. And a lot of people criticize the law for one thing or another, and often it's quite justified. But sometimes it's because people just don't understand that law is not trying to do a certain thing. It's trying to do a different sort of thing. And sometimes the criticisms are misaligned with what law is actually trying to do. For instance, when judges make decisions that you don't agree with on a personal basis. Sometimes there are legal reasons why they make those decisions, and it helps to understand that, particularly if you're going to work with the law in a professional sense. And it helps you understand the culture of the law as well, which I think is important. The next, or another of the things we look at this week, are some of the foundation ideas in law, like lawmaking and court structure. This is more for a point of revision, because we know a lot of students will have done legal studies beforehand at high school before they come to university. If you haven't, it's not a big deal, because we give you resources to follow up on, to explain those things. But for many students, this is more of a revision exercise. Remember what this is. Remember what this, how the hierarchy works, and so on. So that is all in the notes, and we have those two different groups of students to cater for. That those who've already done a lot of this in legal studies, who might be thinking, oh, how many weeks are we going to spend doing this all over again? Which we're not. We're just going to introduce the stuff. But if you haven't studied it before, we're going to give you those links so that you can follow up and you can find out the information, and we'll all be on a level playing field. All right. Now, the next topic I want to jump to is feedback, and to talk about the importance of feedback in study. And it's certainly something that comes up a lot in the feedback you give us. Feedback on feedback. People want more feedback. They want more detailed feedback. Now, one of the things you need to do as an adult learner is to not just think about feedback in terms of marking. There's lots of different ways that you get feedback, and often people just think, if I get extensive notes on my assignments, that's the only way I get feedback. Now, we do give you notes on your assignments, and we give you guidance, but the scale of teaching at university, as I said, there's 200 students, and the limited resources universities have for marking, which is largely allocated an hour per student for all your work for a term needs to be marked within an hour, means that we can't give you detailed, lovingly crafted feedback on your assignments, which say, in this sentence you should have said that, and this sentence you should have said this. So if your expectations are coming in that you're going to get these full edits and markups on all your assignments, it's just not going to happen. The finances of universities are such that we only have an hour to mark, and that's everything across the whole term. But the other thing is that there are much better ways of getting feedback in the course, and I'll talk about those now. And I suppose the other thing to let you know about the marking on assignments, we are going to give you feedback. We'll use rubrics to give you points of what you've missed and all those sorts of things. But the other thing is we keep metrics on what students do and don't do, and we have found that the majority of students don't ever look at those things. They don't ever look at that feedback. So again, we could put more energy and effort and resources into providing more of that assignment-based feedback, but we also do that knowing that the vast majority of students just look at their grade and don't actually look. Now, if you are the person, the minority who are actually looking at your assignments and looking at that feedback, that's fantastic, and I think it's great that you do that. But reality checking, we have the digital footprint. We can see what people are doing, and it's a little disappointing when you've spent a substantial amount of time giving feedback, knowing that no one's ever going to read it. All right, so where do you really get feedback from? The primary source of feedback is your workshops. It's coming along, attending, and participating, and testing your skills. So a great analogy to this is sport. If you're getting serious about getting better at a particular sport, what would be better? Just getting some written feedback each week on what you're doing, or actually practicing those skills and actually being able to test it in a safe environment where you don't have any consequences and you can see how you go. Now, obviously, like anything, things, they have an intellectual, theoretical component that you can test through assessment. but there's a lot more that's tied into those practical skills. So your primary source of feedback is those workshops each week, and it's coming along. As I said, safe environment. No one's going to die or go to jail because of a mistake you make in these. You're not going to lose marks for a mistake. In fact, when you come to write up your workbook, mistakes are really great because you actually have a lot more to talk about when you go, oh, we did this, we shouldn't have done that because this has led to this particular result. In future, we won't be doing that. So again, think about that practice. Sport may not work for you, but you can get the concept that if you want to get better as a basketball player, you're not going to just write assignments about written pieces about basketball and get feedback on them. You need to be actually out on the court practicing those skills. So that's the I think the primary source of feedback is, and some students miss that. And I know it's easy to be a lurker. It's easy to just go, oh well, I'll just go along and listen to what everyone else has to say. But that's really wasting your time because you're not getting better. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get better at basketball by watching a lot of basketball on TV. That'll make me really good at basketball. And we all fall into that sort of mental trap from time to time with things. Watching some YouTube videos will make me better at the skill that I need to learn rather than actually doing it. Now, the other form of feedback is you can book consultations to see me, and there's a link to a Google Calendar on Moodle, and you can book in 20-minute sessions to have a chat, the same you'd book a time to see a doctor or anyone else. And I'd encourage you to take advantage of that. They're going to be different times each week. This is why I use Google Calendar, because as a head of course, I have a very changing timetable each week. I have different meetings and different exciting administrative things I do each week. So a week ahead, I plan out what time I'm going to have available for consultations. I set that aside, and you can look in ahead of time and you can book in those sessions to come along and have a chat. Now, those chats can be, quite serious about, what do I do about this? I don't understand that. Or they can be more general. And please don't be afraid of booking that time just to have a more general chat about your progress. If this were a face-to-face unit, we'd be having, corridor chats, waiting outside the tute room for the previous group to leave, and we'd have a bit of a chat, and you'd be able to, ask advice or talk about issues more generally. And one of the problems of online study, while it's way more convenient and flexible, is that you don't have those random opportunities to have a chat. So yeah, even if you want to, it's good to have an issue you want to talk about and a bit of an agenda ahead of time, but don't think that I'm only ever going to book a time in to talk to Scott if I'm in serious trouble because he's so busy and he doesn't have much time and I don't want to take up his time, or any of those things that students often tell me. Honestly, it's a pleasure to talk to students, and you'll be taking me away from usually what I'd otherwise be doing is boring paperwork and bureaucracy. So it's a joy to actually talk to a human being. So anyway, those are your primary, and we talk about this in the module this week. Your primary sources of feedback. Yes, you get some feedback on your assignments. Now, obviously, the quiz will tell you if you're right or wrong. The workbooks are really based on complete or non-complete, so we're not going to give you substantial feedback on those, but we'll give you an overall feedback on your progress and saying these look good or these could do that, but we're not going to be saying, word 3, paragraph 2, you should use this word. And then most of the focus of that limited resource of marking money is going to go into that problem-solving exercise, because that's really the crux of what we're doing this term. So your assignments will give you some feedback. Participating and engaging in those workshop challenges will give you much more feedback and give you much more confidence in your abilities, because you're actually doing things and testing them out and getting feedback from people live, from myself and from your teammates. And then there is the book-in consultation sessions option, which I think is a good one. And as I said, I think I've overemphasized. So many students just go, oh, look, I didn't do it because I don't want to be a bother. Please be a bother. My work is as a head of course is too much involved in pointless reports and spreadsheets, and not enough in dealing with human beings. I guess this makes another link to another point I wanted to talk about, and that's engaging with your learning community. A lot of people approach this study as a lurker, and they just sit there and do whatever minimum they need to do to get through. It's very disappointing for myself and for everyone else involved, and it's a waste of your time and money, to be honest. You're paying a lot for this educational experience. Make the most of it. And I understand everyone's got a lot of commitments, and you're not going to be full of energy every particular week, but I think it's important to plan ahead of time and make sure that you've set aside a little bit of energy for being involved and being engaged. And it's not just an extrovert thing. It's not just the fact that the extroverts can get in and make a big splash. I'm an introvert myself, but I also acknowledge the importance of being able to make that effort and get involved. You make very important connections at uni. I still have connections with people I studied with, people who taught me at uni. I'm still in contact with people who I met through as guest lecturers or met through practical research tasks and things. I still keep in touch with from time to time. So university is a good place to start developing those networks that will benefit you throughout life. And again, it's not just a thing for extroverts. Introverts have to put in a bit more effort to try and to get involved and to build those networks, but it is worthwhile for everyone. And yeah, a lot of it is about a type of attitude, and a lot of people unfortunately see study in terms of compliance and what is the minimum I need to do to get through. And that is a waste of your time, because if that's your approach, you're not going to do very well in your study. And it's a very competitive workplace, and an employer is not going to look at two employees, potential employees, and say, well, this person, is keen and enthusiastic and did well. This person just did the bare minimum and lurked and didn't turn their video on in workshops and didn't speak up. Who am I going to employ out of those two? So there are a lot of people who just get through uni degrees thinking that, I've just got to get through the degree and I'll be fine. And it's a big regret, because all you've done is incurred a debt that's not made you more employable. We'll talk about some of those things later in the term, and in fact, the last couple of weeks we're going to look at job skills in more detail. But I guess want to make an appeal at the start to keep that energy going, be proactive. And yeah, there'll be times throughout the term that all of us will have low energy ebbs, a lot of other commitments, and we just think, I just really don't want to get involved. But you guys are paying for all this time. Make the most of it. All right, what's the next topic I wanted to talk about? Resources. We've got a bit of an introduction to resources in this module. That's going to be picked up and run with more in the next few weeks, where we look in more detail about what information sources the law uses, how they're evaluated, how they're written, and so on. Each week we have a guided reading, and that serves a few purposes. Readings have the basic purpose of transmitting information and finding out what's in them, but there are much more compelling reasons to do the readings. If all we wanted you to do the readings was to pick up the three major points, it would be more sensible just to give you those 3 points. The actual process of doing the reading is part of the process itself. So reading is an active skill. It's about learning to develop those skills, and know how to that reading an academic piece is not the same as reading for pleasure, and how there are lots of tricks and skills about skimming and going back and focus reading and all things we're going to talk about later on, that you need to do to deal with the quantity of reading that you'll need to do as a professional. And law students, I'm looking at you. Criminology students, you're going to have to do quite a lot of reading. Law students, you do a massive amount of reading. And it's important to start developing those skills. So we set you those guided readings within a structure, within some guidelines and some pointers to look for and how to do and what to do. And as I said, we don't summarize those readings for you, because the whole point of the exercise is to get you that experience of developing those reading skills and thinking about what you're doing while you're reading. Because otherwise, if you try to passively read something, you'll find that by 10 minutes in, you're just reading the same paragraph over and over again. And I'm sure we've all had that experience. Or we're sitting there with a highlighter and you end up colouring the whole thing in with the highlighter before long. So yeah, guided readings are there not just because they're useful, have interesting information in them, but also to get used to those different genres of writing and those skills of active reading. All right, so in conclusion, there's not a really big sort of thematic wholeness to this module, because there's lots of different things we need to do to lay those foundation skills. So the later modules are much more thematic, and they're much more get to the point of where you get to the end and you can go, okay, this all fits together into a big picture. This week we kind of go, oh, well, there's this and there's that, and it's whatever. But don't worry, they'll be more coherent in the later ones. This week it's really been about laying those foundations and getting you prepared for study. So remember, following on from this, remember you've got teams where you can ask questions, not just just about the course generally, or things you've seen in the news. There's lots of different things you can do in teams. Remember to complete all the tasks in the lessons for this week so that you can open the quiz. You don't have to do it this week, but I recommend you do it as soon as you can. And make sure you're prepared for the workshop, and that you're able to write up the challenge. Again, the first set of challenges aren't due to week 5, but please don't leave them to week 5 to start writing them up. Write them up while they're fresh. The final thing I wanted to mention is that we have weekly check-in surveys. The short questionnaires that we send out just to ask you about your needs, and things you'd like us to discuss more or less, or probably more. Now, I know you get over-surveyed and you're sick of being sent surveys and everything else. Former students have told me that. But this check-in is a really important process because it gives us a big picture on how everyone's tracking. And we then we close the loop later and in the next week, and we will respond to you. So if we find that a large number of students are telling us they wanted more detail on the rules of precedent, then we can come back and we can give you more of that detail. So those check-in surveys are very important. You will also have a feedback survey to do at the end of term, but that's too late. And we are encouraging you to do that because our KPIs are about getting those have your say surveys back in, and we'll talk about those later. But honestly, it's much better to mend problems or issues before they become big. So that's why we send out these check-in surveys each week, to make sure we get that big picture of how everyone's tracking, while we still have time to respond to those things. So please make sure you do that as well. All right, that's been a big info dump for you all, and I'll let you go now, and I will talk to you if you would in the Wednesday daytime workshop. I will see you there. Otherwise, remember, always feel free to book in a time to chat if you want to.